Hi guys, so before we get into it, a very quick disclaimer that you'll find all my other Amicus reviews in my Amicus playlist, and there will be spoilers today. Now, originally, I had intended to cover another Amicus film before this one, a full-length feature called Whatever Happened to Jack and Jill, I think that's the title of it, but every version of it I could find online was of such a dire quality, like really scratchy and bad audio. I just couldn't face it, in all honesty. You can buy a DVD of that film, but it's quite pricey, like £14-15, and I didn't want to spend that amount of money just to find out that it's in just as bad a state as the versions that are available for free online. Now, going forwards, I may still force myself to watch that film off camera just so I can use it as part of my eventual Amicus ranking, but for now I've decided not to do a full-length review of that film and just press on with the next one, which is Asylum. So we're going straight back to the horror anthology films again, and in terms of how I'm going to review this, same as I would review any horror anthology, I'm going to talk about the main stories in order and then finish off with a conclusion. But before all that, we will talk about the framing story as it's described on the wiki page of Asylum. So let's do that then. Let's dive into The Asylum. Who's with me? We begin with Robert Powell driving up to the Asylum, which is basically a stately home with bars on it, and we get some really dramatic music, Night at Bald Mountain. It's a fantastic musical choice to start this thing off with. Tales from the Crypt did a similar thing. It had its very own old school and probably public domain music to get things going. Amicus had really hit on something here in terms of how to start these movies, because as soon as I hear Night at Bald Mountain in this, I am ready to watch this film all over again. This has one of the cleverest linking stories I've ever seen in a film like this. Normally, with a horror anthology, you'll just get the most basic of hooks, an excuse to tie all the stories together, and that's that. You'll get the odd one that's cleverer than others, you know, like Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. But for the most part, and this doesn't just go for the old school anthologies, this goes for the more modern ones like VHS as well, you won't get all that much in terms of whatever they've come up with to link the tales. But Asylum has got a really clever storyline. So Robert Powell is playing a guy called Dr. Martin. He's travelled to this asylum to interview for the new position that's opened up, but the head honcho, Dr. Rutherford, he decides to give him a test instead of an interview. So what Martin has to do is he has to go up to this one particular ward and speak to the 4 residents on the wing, and he has to try and figure out which of these 4 is Dr. Starr, who apparently used to have the position that Martin is now trying to get. Dr. Starr apparently went completely crazy and had to be committed himself, but now he has a different personality completely, and he only lives in that personality. So it won't be easy for Martin to try and figure out who Starr actually is. But this whole thing just gives us, the viewer, more to be going on with than we would normally have in a film like this, because normally we just watch the stories one by one and enjoy them, but this time around we're not only enjoying the stories, but with each one we're looking at the main character and just looking for clues as to whether this person might be Dr. Starr. This film feels the least like an anthology movie out of all of these portmanteaus that Amicus did. This actually feels like just a normal full-length film to me a lot of the time, that just happens to have an anthology style middle structure to it. And when we get to the 4th story in this, the film just gives up being an anthology film and just ties that 4th story immediately back to the framing story. We probably spend more time with Dr. Martin and the framing story in this than we ever would have done in any of the other anthology films that Amicus did. It does feel very different, but it's very, very clever. I wish more films would try and come up with a framing story like this one, in all honesty. There's another really clever part to it that I like. So when Dr. Martin is going up to the ward initially, he passes all these pictures on the walls, which are just like cartoon depictions of crazy people with daft expressions like just think of the most craziest, wackiest expressions that an insane person could produce. And that's what you get in these pictures. And you can just tell that back in these medieval times, these characters would have been badly treated. They would have been like lobotomized or just cast into the darkest dungeon possible. That those wouldn't have been good eras for people like that to live in. And it's creepy when Martin's looking at these pictures because the camera's like going round and round and zooming in really fast, and you get more dramatic music. But I also think to myself, why on earth would these pictures be on the wall of this asylum? Because this place is meant to help people. It's meant to bring people back from what they're suffering from so they can rejoin society. But if you think about it, the patients on the wing, they'll come down the stairs to go to the breakfast hall in the morning and they'll pass these pictures. And it's like the asylum is saying to them, hey, you see these completely batshit insane people in this picture? That's basically you. And you're not going to get out of this place unless you stop being just like that. So what do you think about that? So, yeah, I don't think you would get pictures like this in a real-life mental ward, but I still wouldn't take them out of this movie. They're a lot of fun. But if I had to sum up this framing story, and we'll talk about the epilogue part of it later on, I would simply describe it as the best framing story I have ever seen. It's absolutely awesome. So our first main story is kind of similar to the first one from Tales from the Crypt, actually, in that we have somebody looking to bump off their spouse, except this time the roles are reversed. It's a husband trying to kill his wife. So we've got this guy called Walter. He's not the main character in this. That would be his lover, Bonnie. She's our possible Dr. Star here, but we definitely spend less time with her than we do Walter in this, which is kind of weird. But these two have come up with this harebrained scheme to kill the wife with some kind of fire axe and then put the body parts into parcels, which will make it easier for them to transport those pieces somewhere else, I guess. But I love this character, Walter. I don't know the actor who plays him outside of this film, although he comes across to me a bit like a budget Richard Burton, albeit in a very good way. I mean, I love this actor's voice. It's fantastic. I'm guessing that the character's wife is extremely annoying to live with because purely from a looks point of view, she's absolutely gorgeous and she must be at least 10 years younger than Walter. But that's not good enough for him. No, he wants to be with Bonnie, who's like 25 years younger than him. So he's very much eyeing up an upgrade, and he's not going to take his eyes off the prize. He's willing to commit murder in order to make this switch in his life. But he's so shifty, like before and after the murder. I could just imagine this guy in a 70s episode of Columbo, and Walter would be twitching nervously as Columbo just gives him the verbal runaround for like 45 minutes, and Walter's just constantly heading for the brandy bottle in the corner over and over again, searching for alcoholic inspiration as to how he's going to get rid of this cop. You know, my wife has always wanted a freezer just like that one. Ain't that something? But anyway, getting back to the main story, we end up with Bonnie in the basement, surrounded by all these parcels that have basically come to life. So you've got like the head, and you can see it breathing through the wrapper, and then like the torso bit slithers out from somewhere, and everywhere she looks there's like arms and legs, and they're all sort of coming towards her. And the first time I saw this, I just thought it was frightening. I mean, and the way that they filmed it's great as well. I can't notice any string anywhere. Maybe I'm just not looking hard enough, but I love how it's all shot, and it's terrifying, and I just wanted more of this the first time I watched it. Screw the rest of the anthology. I just wanted a full film about killer parcels. As far as I was concerned, that would have been great. You know you've watched a good horror short when you just want more of that thing, and you don't want to move into another short. That's how good this is. It's an absolutely phenomenal start to this movie, but poor Walter and Bonnie, they didn't get their happy ending. Weird Taylor is one of those socially relevant stories, even in 2024, because it does seem to be a thing, especially in the UK, that it's getting harder for independent businesses to survive, especially those that are a little bit old-fashioned in nature, shall we say. I mean, tailoring, really. Hands up if you have ever bought a suit from a tailor's after being like properly fitted out for it and stuff. Hands up if you mostly buy your clothes by looking for the right sizes on a rack in a store like Primark. Actually, I did buy one suit from a tailor's, now that I think about it. My wedding suit. So maybe once in my 43 years on this planet, but the point still stands. It's not an easy business to make a go of in the modern age. And we kind of get a 2-for-1 in this, because not only do we see this character, Bruno, his business failing, but also the shop is his home at the same time, and he's behind on the rent, so it looks like him and his wife might be kicked out. I think she might be his wife, I'm not sure. So there's a weird obsession with age gaps in this film. We've already had Walter dating a girl young enough to be his daughter. Now we have Bruno and his mysterious woman that he lives with. She's never explicitly described as his wife, but she looks like 20 years younger than him, and he doesn't come across like the sort of character who would date a lot younger than himself. So that kind of leaves me thinking, well, maybe it's his daughter, but who knows? I mean, ultimately, to me, she's just woman in shop, because we never really get a definitive answer on who she is. But yeah, they are facing eviction from where they live. But just when it looks like the chips are down and it's all going wrong, who turns up to offer them a lifeline? Peter Cushing. I mean, he literally turns up like a minute after the rent guy has just given them their final warning. Rent guy disappears out the door. Peter Cushing turns up a moment later, like magic. We don't get a change of scene or anything. Now, I must say, just on the basis of this story, I have often throughout my life, whenever I've been in a big jam, just closed my eyes and hoped that when I open them again, there'll be a knock at the door and it will turn out to be Peter Cushing dressed in black with a mysterious briefcase in one hand, a Book of the Dead in the other, and he will have some unexpected offer for me which will absolutely be too good to be true, but I will take it anyway. And that's never happened yet, but I still live in hope. And what an offer that Cushing has for Bruno, because he's offering to pay him over the odds for Bruno to make a suit for him. He's offering £200 actually. Now, Bruno acts as if this is a lottery win. I'm thinking £200, really? I guess with inflation, or deflation, I should say. In 1972, that would have been a lot more money. Maybe that would be like 2 or 3 months' rent back in the early 70s. But I mean, nowadays, I think £200 would barely get you 4 copies of Asylum by second sight at release price anyway. But to cut a long story short in this, we go from Cushing making this dubious offer to eventually having a situation where a waddling killer mannequin is going after Bruno and his woman in shop. Or possibly this thing that we're looking at in the finale is just every woman's worst nightmare when she's bopping at a disco and she looks up and sees some guy in a really brightly coloured thing just leering at her and stumbling towards her. Actually, you know what? I think the best way for Bruno to deal with the mannequin at the end of this story is to just turn the shop music on and make sure that it's disco music, because then I think the mannequin would stop doing this and start doing this, and that would save the day. As it is, all joking aside, this is a really solid story. The performance by the actor who plays Bruno is probably the best in the movie. I mean, it's really heartfelt, and it's doubly impressive, I think, when you come out with a performance like this when Peter Cushing is in the same story. And the horror is brilliant as well. I mean, I take the piss out of the mannequin, but it looks great, actually. And the fact that it's used quite sparingly really helps, because I think if they'd have used too much of this thing and had like an extended chase sequence and a fight and this, that and the other, it could have reduced the effectiveness of it. But similar to the story with the parcels, I think they've used the punchline moment just the right amount of time, I think, and it just leads me to really loving this story. Actually, it's a fine piece of horror craftsmanship, to be sure. Lucy Comes to Stay is the only one of these stories where the first time I watched it, I thought I might be looking at Dr. Starr for 2 reasons. So firstly, this is very much a split personality sort of story, and it's explained in the beginning that Dr. Starr has a split personality. So I thought, well, okay, well, maybe the character is creating a second split personality off the first one, maybe. And then I thought, okay, so if this character Barbara is coming home from a mental ward, supposedly, then maybe that's a little subtle reference to the fact that Dr. Starr used to work in a mental ward and now doesn't. I mean, it's a little bit thin, this theory, but it's not like I sat down and wrote an essay on the whole thing. I'm just saying what thoughts and feelings went through my head, certainly during the first half of this story. But yeah, I did think that I had identified Dr. Starr. Obviously, that turned out to be wrong if you look at the rest of the movie, but this story has an interesting slant from that perspective, though the actual tale itself is possibly the weakest of the three that take place outside of the asylum, because Barbara basically goes home and murders her brother and nurse, and there's not too much more to it than that. She's got this friend who turns up called Lucy, and I guess at first you'll think that Lucy is the one doing the murdering, but then you will realise that actually Lucy's maybe not real, and it's actually Barbara doing the killing. Now, the actual movie desperately wants you to think that there is no Lucy. I mean, it's really heavy-handed. At the end of this story, when we go back to the ward and see Dr. Martin and Max Reynolds again, Max says something really on the nose, like, there may not have actually been a Lucy, you know, or something like that. And I'm just thinking, okay, that's a bit too far with the dialogue. I can sort of realise for myself that there might not have been a Lucy in this story, but if there's one thing I could change about this one, I would just have the narrative sit on the fence a little bit more. Just make it so that it's a situation where different viewers will have a different opinion. As it is, I think most people who watch this will just go along with what the story wants, which is for you to believe that there was no Lucy. But I think it would have been better if it was a case where you could go either way with it. Now, personally, I think it would be a more interesting story if Lucy was real, and I don't just say that because it would make Britt Eklund real. I just find the concept of this random blonde girl able to be really adept at getting in and out of this house without being seen, I just think that would be really cool somehow. So it's my personal preference that Lucy was real in this story. And when it comes to Barbara looking into the mirror at the end and seeing Lucy, yeah, you'd think, well, she's looking at herself. But I just think, well, maybe she's actually just missing Lucy a lot, and so she's pretending to see her in the mirror. But hey-ho, still a decent story. There is one really funny scene in it. So there's an actor in this called James Villiers, who, to my mind, is the poshest actor to ever be on screen. I remember him being really snooty in a James Bond film once, and he's playing Barbara's brother here. And there's a scene he's in where, so basically he's talking to the nurse, and the nurse tells him that her mother has just been in a car crash or something, and she's on a life support machine, whatever. Life and death situation. She's got to go and tend to her mother. And James Villiers just says something like, but what will we do about Barbara? And I'm thinking to myself, what? You mean Barbara who's fast asleep in her room? Nothing wrong with the Barbara, that one. Just the most insensitive thing to come out with you could ever think of. But then the character seems to sort of backtrack a bit and realise that actually Barbara will be okay. And so he says to the nurse something like, oh, well, you go off then. There's actually a train in 20 minutes, you know. And I'm thinking, how do you know that? Like, you just have the train timetable in your head? Like, you don't even need to look it up or anything like that. And it's not like this character is somebody who will probably go around on a train. We see him driving in the beginning, but no, apparently he's able to just look at his watch and immediately figure out when the next train is. Like, yes, train in 20 minutes, you know, maybe 18 once you've got your shoes and coat on. It just stands out like a sore thumb in the script. Like, that bit of the script was just written really quickly. They didn't really think about it properly, but still, on the whole, great story. Another great story in this really great movie, and let's move on to the next one. So the movie does a little bit of a surprise left turn at this point, because once we are introduced to Dr. Byron, we think we're going into another story, but then Martin just leaves the room, goes down to see Rutherford, and it's like, oh, okay, didn't expect this. Now, from my point of view, doing this review, I think I should probably just address Mannequins of Horror, or whatever it's called, at the same time as I'm doing the epilogue, because the two are kind of intertwined. On the Mannequin side of things, it's a fairly simple little horror story where this guy puts his soul into the puppet, he sends it downstairs to kill Rutherford, and then Martin, with the heel of his boot, just kills Byron, because whatever happens to the puppet also happens to Byron, and you can only imagine the grisly end that guy came to, but it's quite a cool little bit. But I'm more fascinated with the late twist involving Max Reynolds. So Max basically comes out and says that he is Dr. Starr. And I guess for the longest time, I've always taken that at face value and thought, okay, that's a cool little twist. I didn't see Dr. Martin's murder coming at all. Although on this viewing, I did have a slight problem with it because I was feeling a little bit more over-analytical this time. I thought to myself, well, should we take Max Reynolds' word for it that he's Dr. Starr? Because it doesn't actually make sense if you think about it. Because, okay, so if he was the guy who attacked Dr. Rutherford in his office and was therefore sent to the wards, so then he would have somehow got out of his room and killed the orderly, fine. So he's now posing as an orderly. But why then would Dr. Rutherford not recognise Dr. Starr's voice on the phone when he's posing as the orderly? Do you see what I mean? It doesn't make sense unless Dr. Starr and the orderly just happen to both have the same voice. So that's where it falls down for me. So when Max Reynolds is saying that at the end of the movie, I'm inclined not to believe him. I just think this is a really crazy maniac, a guy who absolutely should have his own cartoon picture on the stairs somewhere. I think he's one of those people who is obsessed with being something that he's just not clever enough to be. Maybe he wants to be one of these highly paid psychiatrists, but he's not capable of that, and so he's therefore an orderly only, and he resents that. So any opportunity, he will absolutely call himself Dr. Starr. For me, the movie only works logically if Dr. Starr is in one of the 4 rooms. And if that's the case, then I still think it's Barbara. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you just go with what the movie says on this, or do you have a different theory like me? But it's certainly a fascinating ending. There's plenty of talking points. But I've certainly no complaints with the fact that Martin dies, or we get this shorter story with the mannequin. It's all really high quality stuff, whichever theory you ultimately subscribe to. So we've reached that point where I show you the version of the film that I've got for this. I did briefly hold it up earlier. So here is my second sight version of Asylum. I regret to tell you that I once paid £50 for this on release day. I just had a rush of blood to the head, unfortunately, similar with what I did with House That Dripped Blood. If I'd have waited about 3 months, I probably could have got this for about £20 brand new on eBay, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. At least it's a great movie. You do get some good stuff with this. Audio commentary, loads of interviews and things like that. And if we go inside, there is a poster. I'll quickly hold that one up. And pretty neat. And there's also a huge booklet all about the film and stuff like that. It's a fantastic little release that they did for this. I wish there was one of these for all 7 Amicus anthology films, and not just this and The House That Drips Blood, but you can't have everything. Now, shall we get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this? I think we shall. Sounds like there's a lot in there today. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 bloody axes out of 5. For me, this is a masterpiece of this type of movie. In fact, this is my favourite horror anthology film of all time. I've never seen a better one than this. I've got a long affinity with this film going back to the 90s when I first saw it on TV, and I find it hard to believe I'll ever see a better one of these types of movies, in all honesty. And it's definitely up there as probably one of my favourite horror films of all time. So I'll leave it there for today, at least in terms of the movie, unless you want to stay an extra minute and hear my reading update. So I said in my previous video that I'm currently reading Alien Isolation. I still am, but I'm about 2/3 of the way through now. It's a bit weird reading this, having played the game so much over the years, because the author describes the geography of Sevastopol, this space station, differently to how it looks in the game a lot of the time, and it can leave me feeling a little bit confused at times when I'm going through the story. But that's just something I'm going to have to get my head around, because it is a completely different medium. He's not just going to tell the same thing but in book form. And obviously, because the game was so big, the book has had to chop some of the game out here and there, and it's chopped out some pretty good little bits actually. But probably the strongest part of this novel so far are the background chapters that you get on Amanda Ripley. Now, this is stuff that wasn't in Alien Isolation, the game, because the game just more or less focuses on the here and now of what's going on Sevastopol. But in the novel, you get all this background info about Amanda Ripley, entire chapters devoted to her time as a teenage girl, for example, when she's missing her mother and stuff like that. And if you'd put it to me that that stuff was going to be in the book, I would have thought, oh no. But actually, it's really high quality, and you really get into hearing about her life story before she goes to Sevastopol. So that's a real positive for the book. Obviously, I've not finished it yet. I've got about a third of the way to go. So probably next review, I reckon I will have finished it. But we will say goodbye for now. I hope you enjoyed the review of Asylum, and cheerio.